I had never experienced anything like what I'm about to share today. I didn't know such an experience could happen so suddenly, feeling so real. In part, it was real, but at the same time, you know that what you saw theoretically shouldn't be there. I worked as a taxi driver for 5 years before closing the business and leaving that life behind. During that time here in Rio, I always got along well with people. My neighbors knew I worked as a taxi driver, and occasionally, they would take advantage of my schedule to ask for a ride. One night in 2012, around midnight, I received a call from my neighbor. She asked if I was available for a ride to the city center, an area full of bars and dance halls. I agreed and went to the location she mentioned. When I arrived, I saw them carrying her father, a 70-year-old man who seemed unconscious from drinking too much. The daughter and her husband, both familiar to me, placed him in the passenger seat. He looked like a rag doll, his head lolling heavily to one side. They sat in the back, chatting about the party at the father's friend's house. Once we arrived at their neighborhood, they got out, thanking me, and carried the man with some difficulty. Despite my offer to help, they declined, clearly embarrassed. I watched them enter their house and then headed back to mine, just down the street. I parked the taxi, locked the gate, and went to bed. The next day, I spent time with my wife. At 6 p.m., I kissed her goodbye and went to the garage to start my shift. That's when I got the shock of my life. My neighbor's father was sitting in the passenger seat, smiling at me. How did he get in there? I nervously walked up to the car, but as I leaned in to get a better look, he was gone. I chalked it up to exhaustion and continued my shift. Later that night, around 11 p.m., I stopped at Madalena Square for a coffee. After chatting with some fellow drivers, I returned to my car, only to see him again in the front seat. This time, I approached cautiously, but once again, he vanished as I got closer. Frustrated and scared, I checked the car, but everything was locked. When I got home, I told my wife what happened. She looked at me with a serious expression and said, "Beto, Laura's father, passed away last night." Laura told me that when they got home from the party, he seemed unusually heavy, and when they called the ambulance, the paramedic said he had been dead for hours. Suddenly, everything made sense. My wife tried to comfort me, but I was still shaken. I went back to the garage, and there he was again, smiling in the passenger seat. When my wife joined me, he disappeared. I decided to remove the seat entirely, but my wife suggested that maybe he was there to protect me. The next day, we went to the neighbor's house to offer our condolences. I spoke with my mother-in-law, who recommended lighting a candle and saying a prayer for him. From that day on, I never saw Beto in the passenger seat again.